Hey folks, Ted from Immersion here, and I wanted to do as I do and talk about some lesser known rules in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons. This is a rule, or I guess technically it's two rules, that you probably or may have never seen and possibly have never used depending on how you run your game. And one of them kind of makes sense, and the other one was news to me when I was just doing a read through of the player's handbook. As I have when I have spare time, this is what I spend it doing, reading through D&D source books and being like, "Oh, that's interesting. Did you know about this?" And then I make a video on it. I actually made this video years ago, but the channel has grown so much and it's buried through hundreds of videos that you probably haven't seen it. So I thought I'd talk on it. And that is the concept of using an ammunition-based weapon as a weapon rather than like shooting, like having a bow and hitting someone with the bow rather than shooting an arrow off of it. And then also recovering your lost ammunition after you shot it. Or maybe it's not even lost, maybe it's just out there and you want to get it back. So this is actually contained in the equipment section of the player's handbook. And if we jump right here, you can see under ammunition, this is probably a section that for most people, you sort of come to this spot where you look at the table that tells you the name of the weapon, the damage it does, how much it costs, and any funky properties it has. And you might have read what the ammunition property does on something when it first came out or you first looked at it, and then you just sort of put it to the side because it didn't matter. And then, this is probably what you read. You can use a weapon that has ammunition property to make a ranged attack only if you have the ammunition to fire from it. And each time you attack with the weapon, you expend one piece of ammunition, right? That's probably where you stopped. Or maybe even the next line, drawing the ammunition from a quiver, case, or other container is part of the attack. Meaning you don't need to do something ahead of time. You can do a very fluid, pull the arrow from the quiver on your back and string it and shoot, right? And that's pretty standard stuff. As someone who's an archer, you could do that relatively quickly, especially if this is something you do repeatedly and you have your quiver set in such a way, at such an angle, and your arrows at such a length, you could do this relatively quickly and pull that off, with some modicum of accuracy over time. But the next line is the one that I often forget about, or probably most people don't know about. And if you don't keep track of ammunition, it's probably never come up for you at all. But at the end of the battle, you can recover half your expended ammunition by taking a minute to search the battlefield. Now, obviously, there are situations where this can't work, right? If you're flying, right, and maybe you're shooting arrows off at somebody while you're flying, and then you're not going to go back to the battlefield. But if you're like on a palisade wall or in like just the forest clearing in a dungeon, whatever, and you're shooting arrows, you may have a minute to search the battlefield to recover those. And again, in my games, more often than not, the players are like, if they're going to use a bow, they're like, I go and spend the money and I buy like 100 arrows, and I'll just re-up on arrows the next time we're in town. And that's kind of how it's always gone. But I could see this being, if your DMs or you as the DM are a stickler about ammunition management, then this could be big. Or especially if this is early on, like when you first start out and it's like your starting mission and you've got like 20 arrows in a quiver and that's it. Well, 20 arrows in a quiver, let's say you happen to somehow go 10 rounds of combat early on before you have 2 attacks. You could shoot through 10 of those arrows, 10 of those 20. But with a minute searching the battlefield, you could recover 5 of those. And again, later on, as you get to do multiple attacks, 2 attacks, possibly even 3 or 4 attacks, if you're a fighter, recovering ammunition could be really important to you. And again, there's a hard and fast rule right there that says at the end of the battle, you can take a minute and get half of what you shot back. Which is interesting. It doesn't matter if you shot and hit the creatures. It doesn't matter if you critical missed and you shot and you hit a tree, you shot and hit a rock. None of that's important. That's just really flavor for the DM. But ultimately, whatever you shot, half of it you can get back by taking a minute to search. And there's no check involved. And then also, something else that may come up more often than not, if you use a weapon that has the ammunition property to make a melee attack, you treat the weapon as an improvised weapon. Meaning like you're going to use your bow and just use it like a club and hit somebody. Now that one is a little bit interesting because technically a bow is not designed to be used as a club. It is not structured in such a way. Its tensile strength and things aren't designed for clubbing people. So it would use an improvised weapons. If we scroll down here, it will do a D4 damage is what an improvised weapon does. You are not proficient in improvised weapons, typically, unless you take Tavern Brawler. So you would not add your proficiency bonus to the attack you make with this. And it doesn't actually state. I guess you would use strength because it doesn't like. I don't think you're using finesse here with your, even though it may be a ranged weapon, you're still using it like a club, so it would be strength based. So something to consider. But what is also interesting is, and this would be something your DM would have to design into the game, but if an improvised weapon is similar to an actual weapon, it's treated as such. So like if it's a chair leg, it might be used as a club, and then you would just use the club statistics. But yeah, and then it says a sling must be loaded to deal any damage in this way, right? A sling is just a piece of string with like a leather catch to hold the sling pellet or bullet. And if you want to like swing it around and hit somebody with it, you got to have it loaded because that's where the weight of it is. Otherwise, you're just hitting them with like a piece of leather. It doesn't really do anything. I too would also extend this. This is me personally. This is not defined by D&D, but I would extend that same concept to the process of using the ammunition as a weapon. If you want to try to pull off something like a Legolas style, pull an arrow out of your quiver, jab it into somebody as a weapon, and then shoot it, that would be cool. Again, it's not something you're probably going to do too often. Maybe if you know the enemy is super low and you think you can risk just rolling a d4 and maybe dealing enough damage to kill him, it would look really cool in combat to pull out an arrow, stab and down someone in front of you, and then shoot that same arrow at somebody else. Again, that looks really cool cinematically. We've seen it in the Lord of the Rings movies, and I'm sure in a bunch of other movies as well. But that's, I would treat, stabbing someone with an arrow as an improvised weapon, because the arrow itself isn't necessarily made for that kind with it is made for stabbing. So I'll leave that up to you guys. What do you think if someone were to be using a longbow and they pulled an arrow from their quiver to stab someone in melee? It's obviously a strength-based attack. You're stabbing with them. Does it count as an improvised weapon? Would you count it as something like a dagger? What would the damage be? I mean, you're doing what it needs to do, how it would normally attack. However, you're not getting the strength and power behind it you would have if you were drawing it from a bow with 60-pound draw length or whatever. So anyway, this was just a short little video to touch on two, probably. One was kind of self-explanatory, again, using your crossbow, using your bow as a club, as a weapon to hit somebody. That's going to deal an improvised weapons worth of damage. It doesn't really need to be defined there, but they did. And the one that I thought was kind of interesting but lesser known is the recovering your ammunition after you shot it. So let me know what you think. Did you know about this rule? Were you familiar with it? Is this just me bringing it up randomly? Again, I don't know how often this will come up, but I'm sure there's a situation where someone's like, I shot all my arrows. I wish I could get some back, but I've ran out. And then you're like, yeah, sorry, buddy, that sucks. But then lo and behold, there was a rule you could have gotten half of the arrows you shot back. So anyway, thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for continuing to support me and the channel. And we'll see you all next time.